Welcome to the Let's Talk About Talking podcast with your host, Adrienne Fuller, language and communications expert for kids of all ages. On this podcast, we talk about speech, language, and all things happening with your child, giving you specific tactical information you can use to help your kids talk, listen, and thrive in their academic journey.
Well, hi there, everybody. This is the Let's Talk About Talking podcast, and I am Adrienne Fuller, speech language pathologist, and this episode, I'm going to be a little honest. It's a little bittersweet because I've decided that this is going to be the last episode of the season. When I first started this, I said, I don't know how long it'll last. I don't know if we'll continue to do it, and then I started doing it and I fell in love with podcasting. I have really enjoyed talking with people and just trying to create content and like education for parents, caregivers, and even new therapists. And so it's been a real great journey. But it's time for me to take a break. If you know me, you know that saying, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And I notice that I do things pretty intensely, but then I feel like, okay, I need a break. And I feel like this is the end of the school year. It's when I'm recording this. And it's a really good time to pause and take a break. But I'm actually recording a couple of episodes for the fall even today. So we'll definitely be back. But I started the first episode myself as a standalone episode, introducing myself. And I just wanted to end the season with the recording of just myself. And so today I wanted to talk about Therapy 101. This whole episode came about because I was talking to a friend who was in the process of adopting a child. So the child is her foster child right now, but the goal is to adopt. And the child came to her already receiving services. And so I wanted to make myself available to her to answer any questions, and she's asked me some really good questions. So at the moment, this little angel is receiving, I think, speech therapy and occupational therapy. But she had like a question like, well, how do I know what they're working on? Or how did I know how many times that this child is supposed to receive speech? And I think I've been in the education field for so long, it's something that I kind of automatically know. But if I'm a parent on the other side, I realize you wouldn't automatically know that. And so today I'm going to talk about just some of the, like I just said, Therapy 101. And so this actually, I right now have a clinic and I complete therapy and give therapy in that private practice setting. But these are things that will apply to almost any setting where a child is receiving therapy or intervention services. All right. So when a child is getting therapy, the first thing that is going to be needed is permission. So I'm always astounded. And one time I was in a meeting and this was a parent that we had been servicing their child, and the dad was like, well, I didn't even know that my child was getting speech. And I was like, but you signed off on the permission form. So when you're signing off on forms, parents, be sure that you are reading them. And I know when you have a child and you're enrolling them in different things, in daycare, in preschool, in school, in camps, you will always have to fill out a form. And I know in our busy lives, it's easy to just do everything on the fly. And this is how we've created it. And we've had great success with people asking for, we really want these forms online and we really want to be able to do them on our phones. That's fine. but I do want to be just a reminder to be sure that you're reading forms in their entirety. In order for any therapy services to occur, you should have given your permission. So in the private practice setting, that's going to look like you completing a form, a case history form, a permission form. In the schools, it would look like permission to test, a permission to test form. So be sure that that is completed. And whoever is servicing your child, whether it be the school, a private practice, another organization like an Early Steps or Early Intervention, that should be on file. All right, so be sure permission is the first thing that needs to happen and be obtained. All right, so the next thing is going to be the evaluation or the baseline. So in order for any therapist or professional to know what they're going to work on, we have to test. And so let's first talk about what an evaluation could look like, because I think many times parents come in with these expectations of what it would look like. At the end of the day, an evaluation is, we want to be sure we have permission. We want to be sure that in some way we have talked to the parent via either in person, face to face, a phone call. Even that case history form is the way of you talking or communicating with your child's therapist. We want to talk to the parent about what's going on in any history. Then we want to actually evaluate the child. And so evaluation can look like a lot of things. It can be a formal test where you'll see like an easel of pictures and we ask questions and we take down the answers and then we make a score. I love that method because it's a baseline of a test that's been normed against, in theory, kids that are from multiple ages and backgrounds and demographics to say what the child should be doing at that age. So that's always great to get a baseline. But another form of evaluation can be a parent questionnaire. So a therapist can ask you or your child questions, and from those questions, again, get a score or a baseline for and a baseline is just a starting off point of where the child is at that moment, in that moment. Okay. Another way of evaluation is informal. And so a lot of times it looks like the professional isn't doing anything, or, not doing that test, or not asking those questions. But informal observation is another form of evaluation. And so we just need to know what your child is doing at the time. And I always tell parents, a lot of times, because there's a lot that we have to do in often a little bit of time. And so it feels like there's a lot of things going on at the moment, but to the parent's eye, it looks like nothing's going on. But when a parent walks in the room for evaluation, I'm looking to see, is a child able to interact with me on some level? Are they able to answer questions? Do they need a warm-up period? Because we work with so many toddlers, we ask things like, or we're looking for things like, is there eye contact there? Do they want to initiate conversation, communication, or any activities with me? Keeping in mind that some kids can be more shy, some kids can take a little bit to warm up, some children are very attached to their parents, and all of those things are fine. So that's where the parent reporting and the parent communication comes in when those things happen. Also, with the evaluation, I do want to say this. If there is a form that needs to be completed before the actual evaluation happens, that's always preferable, only because there have been times I've seen a toddler, a little one, and when a kid comes into the clinic or in the therapy room in my space to be evaluated, I always feel like the clock is ticking, because there's a child only, especially a young child, only has a small window of time that they're going to attend to task and be engaged. And so if the parent is taking so much time to fill out a form that could have been completed beforehand, it feels often frustrating at times. So keep that in mind if there's things or things you could do beforehand to prep. Also, things like snacks for children, if in that evaluation process, knowing that there might be a waiting period, bring snacks or their favorite toys, their favorite things they like to play with, favorite things that make them feel comforted. That's always a plus. Also, one thing, kids in a new environment with a new person often won't present as well as maybe they do with you at home. And so it's important that you express or convey to the whoever is evaluating is, I've seen that at home, but a lot of times I've had a situation where a parent just felt like, oh, well, I just felt like you were rushing me. And I felt like, they couldn't really express themselves. And I did take that with a grain of salt. And I do try to leave as much time as I can to get to know the child. But also just conveying that you don't necessarily need to take over the evaluation. Like, there'll be times when I'll show the child a picture and I'll say, what is this? And then the parent will just jump in and like, say it. What is it? You know it. We do it at home. And it's like they don't ever give the child a minute to process or say. So it's okay if the child needs a minute to process the information and then process the time to get it out. So give them some time too in there. So that's the second part, is the actual evaluation, the baseline. We're trying to get a baseline and see what they're going to do so we can make a plan about the goals we want to work on. All right. So that I'll call the next part like 2.5 would be the establishment of goals and targets. So that's all goals are. On most forms, parents, you're going to see two kinds of goals. You'll see the long-term goal and you'll see the short-term goal. So if that's in the private practice setting, that you will see on the evaluation. If that's in the school setting, that will be on the child's IEP, the individual education plan. And so those long-term goals will be what you want to happen long-term, as long as that evaluation is active. So in our clinic, evaluations usually last for 6 months or a year. In the school setting, evaluations or IEPs usually, and those are, I'm sorry, let me go back one thing. In the schools, there's evaluation, and that tends to last a couple of years, 3 years in our district. But the IEP lasts for 1 year. So once we move from evaluation, then there is a plan of care. Plan of care would be the goals, long-term and short-term goals. In the school system, that plan of care is going to be the IEP. If you're working with early intervention, they have a very similar plan that they use with the same things. What you want is the long-term goals. That is going to cover the life of that document. So for us, it's 6 months mostly, but a year in some cases. IEPs usually are a calendar year as well. So overall, the long-term goal would be child will increase language skills, or child will increase the ability to produce age-appropriate sounds. It's more general. But then those short-term goals are actually just telling you how we're going to achieve that goal. So if you happen to be a therapist listening to this, those short-term goals should tell you how we're going to get to that long-term goal. And so keep that in mind. All of these things should be documented, and they should also be, you should have access to them. So in some way, at the end of every IEP meeting, parents are given copies of their child's IEP. I highly recommend you can scan it in. Now, your iPhone has a scanner. If you go to the Notes app and push that camera, that is a scanner. You can keep all of your child's things right on your phone. You can keep them in a physical folder. I am still very much a pencil and paper kind of girl. Keep them all in a file folder, in one of those accordion folders, so you just have it at hand when you need it. If you're working with a private practice or an office, you should get copies of the evaluation. We now email them because the physical copies always got lost. So we email them now, or they're located in your portal. If you go to another office, they may have a portal. But the thing is, you should always have a copy and know what goals that provider is working on. Okay? So that is 2.5. Number 3 is a record of your visits and what was done during each. We call this progress notes. And so during every session, especially in the private arena, whether that's like a private practice, an office, or it's like an early steps, almost every session needs to be documented, and the basics, no books, it's not very long at all, but it's the start and the stop time. It's also what goals were worked on and how your child did during those goals. Usually we use percentages or something out of something. So if the goal is child will use or label common objects, I may say 50%. That means 50% of the time when I asked your child, what is this, or pointed to something, they were able to tell it to me. That's all that means. The schools can be a little different. If they're billing like insurance, which some schools do, they have a record of what your child did and the percentage. But in schools, because their caseloads are so high, oftentimes they should, but they don't always have those progress notes written out and kept all the time. They will often report at the time of the end of the grading period. They'll give you a progress report, how your child is doing. So you should have a progress report or some kind of something to tell you how they're doing pretty regularly, but at the least every year when that IEP is done. But just because you don't get those things doesn't mean that you can't ask for them. So don't hesitate to ask your therapist, speech or occupational, even ABA, what you worked on and how they did. Now, every office is different. I know our office, we like to tell parents what happened after every session. That is super time consuming, and I see why many offices don't do that. But I do encourage parents to foster a relationship with their child's therapist. So, hey, just checking in to see how Johnny did today. If they're not that office that does that, that is not a requirement. Sometimes I wonder if it's overkill, but I think it's very important, especially when we see a child at school, that the parent know what's going on because they're not there. And so obviously if you take your child to an office, they would tell you how they did. And then don't be shy about asking for things that you can do at home. A great therapist, in my opinion, will always give you things to work on, at least, once, twice a month at the minimum. Best case is every single session. But it's just being from the therapist side. sometimes when you take things and you don't tell us how the child did, or you don't do them at all, it feels like, well, why am I sending these sheets home that are going to be thrown away anyway? That's just me being honest. So it's always good. Email is a great tool, especially in the school system, to just kind of say, hey, love that sheet. Can you send more home? Or can you give me any tips? Just making the relationship a two-way thing instead of a therapist telling you what your child can and can't do and then giving you a few things. So it's always good when it's, because then you can also provide insight as into kind of what your child can do and their best case. Like last week I had a child that was a bit whiny, and I was like, hey, I'm noticing this in therapy sessions. And the mom was like, yeah, we're noticing it at home too. And so it's always good to just have that kind of relationship. Okay. So even if there's a text or any kind of communication, acknowledge it. Even if you're super busy, say, hey, in the middle of a busy season, thank you for this information. I'm going to circle back to it. That literally took 2 seconds for me to say, and you could probably take it that long to type, but it keeps the communication open. All right. And the last thing is the end date or the continuing date. So on all therapy services should have a beginning when it starts, which should be when that evaluation is, and then an ending date. So it'll be a plan of care date. It'll be an IEP date. Hey, this document runs from this time to this time. And usually at the end, that's a great time to say, hey, I think it's time for us to stop. I think it's time for us, or I think we should continue. I always use that date as a kind of, okay, where are we in this process of therapy? And then what do we want to happen next? Do we want to continue therapy? Most times that's what we recommend. Or do we want to end therapy? Okay. And so I highly recommend, if you feel like your child's reached their max, then it could be time for you to stop. I can't tell you how many parents I recommend. I'm like, I think we've reached our goal. And the parents are like, oh yeah, me too. I just wait. It's almost like they're waiting for me. And I think it's because I'm the professional. So it's really important. I always like to keep that line of communication open. But hey, there are times when parents are like, we think it's time to stop. As a professional, if I don't agree, I'll say, hey, you are you're the expert on your child. I think we need to continue. Here are the reasons why. But I always respect their decision. Or vice versa. There's times I'm like, I think we've done our max. We've reached our max. And then the parent will say, I'm still seeing this at home. So if either way, parent, if you feel you don't agree with the professional, make your case. If they say, no, I really think they need to stop, or if the professional says, the therapist says, I think we need to continue, and you don't agree, you have choices. You can follow the recommendation. You could find a different provider. You could take a break. And so I always say the ball is always in your court. And so play the game like that. The ball is in your court. Well, those are my 4 things. Remember, Therapy 101. All therapy sessions or therapy services should include permission from you as a parent to do it, an evaluation or a way of getting a baseline, a plan for what they're going to do, a record of the therapy visits and what was done during each, and then an end date or continuing date. I hope this was helpful. I have enjoyed this first season of the Let's Talk About Talking podcast. We'll be back in the fall to provide you with all things that I think you need to know. But look, just like the therapists and the parents are in a relationship, I hope you and I are in a relationship, and you can tell me the things that you want to hear on this podcast, because honestly, I just have a burden. I have a heart to be sure that parents are the most informed that they can be. And so it's my pleasure to do it. I love doing it. But tell me, shoot it in the comments. Hey, what you loved, what you think we should focus more on, and I'll be sure to bring it your way. I want you to have a most wonderful rest of your day, summer, whenever you're consuming this content. I love you dearly. You keep communicating with your child. You'll be so glad you did. For now, I'm signing off saying goodbye.
You've been listening to the Let's Talk About Talking podcast with your host, Adrienne Fuller, language and communications expert for kids of all ages. You can grab Adrienne's book, 30 Days to Get Your Toddler Talking, on Amazon or at speechbuilders.org.